is a mere performance. There's nothing real about it. When you say to these professors, well, what about the research showing hardwired sex differences in the visual system? They make no attempt to refute this research. They've never heard of it. They have no idea what you're talking about. They merely insist. Professor Butler at Berkeley has taught us that gender is merely a performance, that anyone who believes otherwise is an idiot, Republican, or both. And I have no interest, I have no curiosity in learning what you are talking about. I reject it utterly. This is true at the leading schools of education, and I'm putting leading in quote because, of course, they're not leading schools of education. They are not promoting evidence based on data. They are promoting an ideology deriving from Judith Butler and others that is wildly contradicted by reality. They are psychotic. By psychotic, I mean they are detached from reality. But there are schools of education in the United States that are teaching this, that are studying what the research actually has to say. None of them are leading schools of education. One of them is the University of Virginia Falls Church. Not the flagship, not University of Virginia Charlottesville, they do not teach this. But the professional campus, just west of Washington, D.C., does teach this. Jaron Alexander, hardwired differences in the visual system, and how these sex differences inform best practice in the classroom. But before they told, this particular class I'm referring to was a student for mostly teachers who are currently teaching. It's an evening class. These teachers are working towards a master's in education. But before the instructor told the students about Jaron Alexander and M and P and the two visual systems, they simply were assigned to go to the cafeteria or the library and write 300 words about whatever you saw there. And then come back and we'll share what you've written. In this group, every woman provided lots of detail about what she'd seen. The paint was peeling, the carpet was frayed, the food was cold, the lighting was too dim. But in this group, every man wrote about some action he'd observed. These two guys were arguing about the football game, then this girl came in, she was being chased by this other guy, he was trying to kiss her, she was trying to push him away. At first I thought it was sexual harassment, but then she started like giggling, so I figured it probably was not sexual harassment. I don't know anything about this girl or this boy. Are they tall, short, fat, thin, attractive, unattractive? What kind of clothes are they wearing? We don't know. Do you see what I'm getting at? We are humans. We are higher primates. Like all higher primates, vision is our primary mode of understanding. If I were a rat, I might say, can you smell what I'm getting at? But we're not rats. We're humans. We now understand that there are profound sex differences in the visual system, well documented by researchers in neuroscience, unknown to most professors of education, but not to all. And we now know that these sex differences influence how kids write and how they read. I have visited more than 40 schools across Australia on 6 different tours. On my first visit to schools in Australia, back in 2006, I visited schools in Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane. Learned a great deal on that first tour. Learned about things I'd never heard of before. Like the Zimbabwean diaspora, a phrase I had never heard before that trip to Australia. Many of you know that Zimbabwe, formerly known as Rhodesia, for most of the 20th century, was run by rich white farmers who had enormous plantations, tens of thousands of acres. In the 1990s, and then especially in the year 2000, those rich white farmers were told they'd have to leave. Their land was taken from them by the government without compensation. They were free to leave the country, but if they left the country, they would not be allowed to take any money or valuables with them. They could leave the country basically with a suitcase full of clothes. Nevertheless, many of those formerly wealthy white farmers did choose to leave. And for a variety of historical reasons, the great majority of those who left Zimbabwe came to Australia. So the assignment at the school I was visiting, a year 7 classroom, is either roughly 7th graders. The assignment was to write a story from your own perspective. But you were not born and raised here in Australia. You must imagine that you were born into one of these wealthy white families 13 years ago. You came to this country, to Australia in 2000. It is now 2006. You're a 13-year-old girl, a 13-year-old boy. Write about what your life is like now. So a girl named Melissa wrote a story. The protagonist named Melissa. Melissa's story begins with Melissa sitting on her bed, thinking back to the last party. This school, like most schools in Australia, the kids wear uniforms every day, except when they don't. 3 days a year, there's a social party. You don't wear your uniform on that day, you wear a party coat. Her family had come to Australia in the year 2000, but for reasons which she explains in the story, her parents have not been able to gain citizenship. So they can't find steady work because their parents are not citizens. They're not starving, they're living on charity from the local network of churches. But it's not luxury by any means. So Melissa, in the story, her protagonist is thinking back to the last party when she wore the best dress she owned to the social, and as soon as she walked in, 3 girls pointed at her and started whispering and giggling because they recognized her dress. It used to belong to Gretchen, to one of them. Gretchen had spilled that bread sauce down the front and they couldn't get the stain out. They had donated it to the church and had come to Melissa, and the girls were whispering and pointing, saying, "Look, it's Gretchen's dress. You can still see where the stain was." Melissa had run out of the room in tears. Now, the next social is tomorrow. Gretchen is sitting on her bed. She has laid out on her bed the few outfits which she could possibly wear, each of which is defective in some way, which she describes. And as she touches each of the outfits in turn, a tear rolls down her cheek and onto the clothes. The teacher was deeply moved by Melissa's story. She read the entire story to her class. This is how I happened to hear it. The teacher said, "Class, that is great. Do you understand what makes that such a powerful story? 2 things. First of all, did you see the detail of color and texture that Melissa puts in her story? How the periwinkle blouse has faded to a dull sky blue. How the corduroy jumper's been worn to a shine. You can see it in your head. You can almost touch it. Second, and more importantly, did you see how Melissa gets you into the mind of her protagonist? When her protagonist starts to cry, you know exactly why she is crying. You want to cry along with her. That is great writing. Well done, Melissa. I want you all to aspire to that quality of writing. So I spoke with Justin, a boy in the same class. Justin had written a story for this assignment. In Justin's story, the father goes back to Africa, manages to get across the border back into Zimbabwe, manages to get back to the site of their old plantation, where he digs up the diamonds and the gold that they had buried many years earlier when they saw the troubles coming. Steals a motorcycle, and from this point on, the story is very derivative of the Steve McQueen sequence in The Great Escape, if you've seen that movie. He's racing up the highway being pursued by the 3 police officers, goes off the highway onto the grassland, toward the border, jumps over the barbed wire, marking the border, but falls off the motorcycle, is surrounded by the 3 police officers, but grabs the rifle from one, knocks the second one down, knocks the third one down, leaps back on the motorcycle, and escapes to freedom with the diamonds and the gold. The teacher was not impressed. The teacher said, "Justin, I have several major problems with your story. First of all, you did not do the assignment. The assignment was to write about a boy your age living here in Brisbane. You didn't do that. You wrote about the father going back to Zimbabwe, but Justin, that's not even my biggest problem. My biggest problem is that I know nothing about your protagonist as he's racing down the highway being pursued by the police. Is he terrified he's going to be captured, thrown in jail for who knows how long? Is he longing for his family back home in Brisbane? Is he enjoying the landscape, taking in the fresh air? I don't know. He might as well be a robot. Justin, I have to ask you to write your story over. Good creative writing. And by good here, I mean genuine, honest creative writing. It comes very close to the core of who you are as a human being. Justin doesn't want to write a story about feelings and colors and textures. Or as Justin said to me, his exact words, Justin said, I already wrote my story. She doesn't like it, that's her problem. Justin proudly took a 0 for that assignment. He proudly took a 0 for that assignment. He's not going to pretend to be somebody he's not just to please the teacher. The lack of awareness of gender differences has the unintended consequence of reinforcing gender differences. Because this teacher, like most teachers, has received no formal instruction in sex differences and the kinds of stories that girls and boys want to tell, she got one more boy who's decided creative writing is for girls. How would you do it differently? Well, again, I think best practice begins with understanding what is the story the boy wants to tell and help him to tell that story better. Don't assess the boy's story from the girl's perspective, just as you should not assess the girl's story from the boy's perspective. What would happen if we were to assess Melissa's story from Justin's perspective? What might we say? You might say, Melissa, what you written is not a story. A story has to have some action. Something actually has to occur between the beginning of the story and the end of the story so as to give rise to a plot. Melissa, the action of your story consists of your protagonist. This is not enough. But you would encourage Melissa. You'd say, you do have the kernel of a great story here. Remember how your protagonist noticed 3 girls mocking her and making fun? Oh, she gets a gun and goes and shoots each of those 3 girls. That would be a story. But again, I'm joking. I'm not suggesting you actually do that. I'm trying to illustrate how silly it is to assess the girl's story from the boy's perspective. It is equally silly to assess the boy's story from the girl's perspective, insisting that they have color, detail, texture. Help him to write the story that he wants to write. Help him to find his voice as a writer. Or as subordinate clauses. Instead of his feet smelled awful, how about his feet smelled so awful the flowers wilted and died when he walked past? I didn't come up with that. I learned that from Denise Scott. Denise Scott teaches 3rd grade at Clearhouse James Elementary in Tampa, Florida. Tampa, Florida, that's a school district in Hillsborough County. 5th largest school district in the United States. Like all big school districts, they've got big data on all their teachers. With 4 years of data on Denise Scott, we know that boys enter her classroom scoring at the 28th percentile in the district assessment of writing. After 1 year with Denise Scott, those boys are scoring at the 60th percentile on the district assessment of writing. She is an outlier. This is a Title I school. No one else, no other teacher in the district has accomplished anything like that. She has the same books, the same content, the same curriculum, the same class size as all the other teachers. But her boys jump more than 30 percentile ranks. No other teacher accomplishes that. That's why I was in her classroom. She is a gifted teacher of boys, and we can learn from her. She didn't learn this at her school of education. She is a naturally gifted teacher of boys, but we can learn from her. And we can deploy her strategies, and we can become more successful. Suzanne Collins begins The Hunger Games by describing a cat as having a mashed-in nose, half of one ear missing, eyes the color of rotting squash. She could have said goldenrod eyes. She could have used an adjective, but she didn't. She restated the adjective as a subordinate clause, eyes the color of rotting squash. That's boy-friendly writing, and boys love The Hunger Games. Why do boys love the Hunger Games? What's the essential plot of the Hunger Games? The essential plot of the Hunger Games is a teenage girl who is loved by two boys and she has to choose between them. That's familiar. That's exactly the same plot as the Twilight books. This is also about a teenage girl who's loved by two boys, Jacob and Edward, and she has to choose between them. Boys hate the Twilight books. Why do boys hate the Twilight books? There's several reasons why boys hate the Twilight books. One is the writing. In the Twilight books, unlike the Hunger Games, you will find words like pumpkin and avocado used not as nouns but as adjectives. That's girly, it's very flowery. Boys don't like it. Offer your students more opportunities for free writing. Write about anything you want. Help them to find their voice as writers. Now, I will warn you that when you do that, you will find that some boys like to write violent stories. Not all boys, not most boys, but some boys. What's in bounds and what is out of bounds? So I was speaking to parents in Dulwich, which is an affluent suburb of London, England. It was my Boys Adrift presentation. In the Boys Adrift presentation, we look at data showing a growing gender gap in academic achievement, with boys falling farther and farther behind their sisters. This is true in the United Kingdom, but it's true in the United States. It is true, equally true, for white, black, and Latino boys. Why is this, and what can parents do about it? Afterwards, a husband and wife came up to share their story. They have an older daughter, younger son. Older daughter doing very well at school, full marks. Younger son, not so much, doesn't like school. Getting low marks, especially in English, hates to write. So they moved him over to the boys' school. For boys' school to be successful in this era, they will have to know how to capture and motivate this boy. Moved him to Dulwich Prep, the boys' school. First week at the boys' school, the teacher gave a choice of 3 writing assignments. One read as follows: you are a Roman gladiator. Tomorrow you must fight in the arena. How do you prepare today? That night, Mom came into her son's bedroom and said, it's past 10 o'clock, it's time for lights out. And he said, but I'm doing my homework. And she said, okay. She said it was the first time in his life that he had wanted to stay up past his bedtime to do a writing assignment. He had so many ideas. All right, so tomorrow you have to fight in the arena. What do you do today? We get a chicken and you chop its head off and you rip it to pieces. And you smear the fat on your shield to make your shield slippery. So this guy's sword will slip off and he'll be off balance. You can get him. And then you drink the blood. And the parents were excited to share this story with us because this boy had done a complete 180. In 1 year's time, this boy who hated school had become a boy who loved school. This boy that hated to write now is a boy who loved to write. And surely some writing is out of bounds. Where do you draw the boundary? High school in the United States, 10th grade English. The assignment was write about whatever you want. And a boy decided to write about the Battle of Stalingrad, winter 1942, from the perspective of a Russian soldier. He had researched this carefully. The Russian soldier's on patrol when he's ambushed by German soldiers trying to stab him with a knife so as to make no noise. And the Russian soldier fires his rifle at point-blank range into the face of the German soldier. And the boy then describes what happens when you fire a rifle at point-blank range at another man's face. What happens is that the head explodes. piece of eyeball goes one way, a piece of brain goes another way, a piece of chin with tooth still attached goes another way. This boy was suspended from his high school. And the parents were told that the boy would not be allowed to return to school until the parents had obtained an evaluation by a licensed professional who would have to write a letter to the school on letterhead assuring the school that the boy posed no imminent danger to himself or to others. And when the parents shared that story with me, it really struck a chord with me personally, because I wrote a very similar story, somewhat similar story, 42 years ago when I was a senior at Shaker Heights High School in Ohio. Our lead teacher for English, Robert Hansen, nominated me and 3 other students to sit for a competition, a national competition, administered by the NCTE, National Council of Teachers of English. Roger showed the 4 of us into a room, gave us each a blue book, and said, "You have 45 minutes. Write a story." I wrote a story about East German refugees escaping west to West Germany, crossing a minefield in the middle of the night. They're almost at the border when one of them steps on a mine, which blows off his left leg to the hip, blows off his right leg below the knee. So he no longer has feet. He is crawling west, the last few feet across the minefield, as blood pours out the stumps where his legs used to be. The East German guards, of course, had heard the explosion. They turned their spotlights to where they heard the explosion. They found him. And now they've got their rifles and they're shooting at him. And I described how the bullets are kicking up little clods of dirt on either side, but narrowly missing him. The West German guards calling out encouragement, but of course they're not allowed to go out into the minefield, but calling encouragement to him, and he crawls the last few feet. And the West German guards pick him up to take him to hospital, and in that moment, he dies. The end. I was pausing because today is September 22nd. My own mom died 11 years ago today, September 22nd, 2008. Going through my mother's papers after her death 11 years ago, I found that she had saved the certificate sent to our home from the NCTE, awarding me their highest honor in creative writing. Boys have always written about traumatic amputation and violent death. 40 years ago, it could get you an award, as it did for me. Today, it's more likely to get you a discipline referral. Why do so many boys not regard academic achievement as a masculine? Because we're teaching them that academic achievement is a masculine. Boys doing things that boys have always done. Pointing fingers at each other, saying, "Bang, bang, you're dead." Writing stories with violent death. Drawing pictures of weapons. Now gets you in trouble. But I still haven't answered the question. What's inbounds? What's outbounds? It's very simple. Generic and classic violence is inbounds. Generic means violence which is intrinsic to that genre of writing. If you're writing a story about Roman gladiatorial combat, there will be blood and battle axes and decapitations, because that's what happened in Roman gladiatorial combat. And if that's the story your boy wants to tell, then your job as his instructor is to help him to tell it better, to make it more vivid, more evocative. That's inbounds. Personal or threatening violence is outbounds. A boy named Justin wants to write a story about a boy named Justin. He brings a knife to school to stab a boy named Michael, and there is a boy named Michael at the school who's been making fun of him. That's out of bounds. That's personal. That's general. And teachers sometimes push back. I was leading, this is a very small sliver of a 2-day, 14-hour workshop. We're going to go through each of the content areas, what I've learned. And a teacher at that longer workshop said, "Dr. Sack," he said, "I'm sorry. I describes what happens when you fire a rifle at a man's head. I don't want to encourage violence. I don't want to condone violence. What about Columbine? What about Virginia Tech? I don't want to condone that. And I asked her please to open to that section in chapter 2 of my book, Boys Adrift, under the bold heading, Boys Adrift is the book, not Why Gender Matters. Chapter 2 of Boys Adrift, you'll find a bold heading. What about Columbine? We know a great deal about Dublin people, and there are two killers in Columbine. April 20th, 1999. We know that many months before April 20th, 1999, both these boys wrote stories about describing bringing guns to school and killing other students, whom they named, and laughed as the students crumpled and died. In both cases, teachers were horrified and appropriately made a referral, but no definitive intervention followed. Why not? Because the counselor is overwhelmed. Because the teachers are referring the boys who write about Roman gladiators in World War II. Because Eric Harris was such a nice one. Such a charming boy. If you care about preventing actual violence, this is a distinction you must understand. Most of the boys who write violent stories are writing stories with generic and classic violence. They are not more likely to be agents of actual violence. We know this. We have the research which I present in Boys Adrift. Rarely you will encounter a boy who's writing a story that depicts personal violence, threatening other students at school. That is grounds for urgent same-day intervention. That boy is more likely to be an agent of actual violence. This is the consensus of scholars. It is also the consensus of the United States Secret Service, which last year published guidelines for teachers about identifying school shooters before they engage in violence. This is exactly the distinction they make. I love to give examples of schools who are doing it right, and this will have to be our last example before we adjourn. So, Gateway Catholic School in Chesterfield, just west of St. Louis, invited me to lead that 2-day, 14-hour workshop where we go through each of the content areas. What are gender-specific instructional strategies for engaging boys in English language arts, creative writing? What are gender-specific instructional strategies that motivate elementary school, middle school girls in computer coding and physical science? Andrea Lynch, at the school for many years, teaching 6th grade, teaching English language arts, creative writing. And it's always been her practice to begin 6th grade by asking every student to make a diagram or a triptych depicting any story you like from the book of Genesis. Catholic school. Any story you like from the book of Genesis. This is what one of her boys turned in. Genesis chapter 4, Cain murders his brother Abel. And she told me she did not like it. First of all, it didn't look like it took very much work. It's very simple and plain. There's no faces or detail, just silhouettes. There's no color. The only color is the blood oozing out of Abel's skull. She was going to give it a very low mark. She's comparing it to this. This is what one of her girls turned in. Genesis chapter 1, creation. Lots of color, lots of detail, lots of texture. This girl has painstakingly fringed the grass. Fringed the green paper to give the appearance of grass. This is not drawn. This is inlaid paper. This girl has cut out white paper, brown paper, black paper to depict the puppy, likewise the snail and the elephant. Not quite drawn to snail, but still, you know, what mark are you going to give this? A+, of course. What mark are you going to give this? She was going to give this a very low mark. Then she noticed the rod. This boy has attached a rod Cain's arm. She'd been watching killing Abel over and over again. And she remembered what I kept saying during the 2 days, 14 hours of that workshop. I kept saying, you've got to assess the boy's work from the boy's perspective. What's the story that he is trying to tell? What's the picture he wants to draw? She realized it's all about action. And she said to the boy, that was so creative on your part to attach a rod to Cain's arm so as to engage the viewer in the action of the story. She said, A+. said, there's a Dr. Sax who's going to come back next year to lead small group content area workshops. May I please keep this? He said, may I please keep your diorama? It's so wonderful. I'd like to show it to Dr. Sax. And she told me the boy's face just beamed. And he did a complete 180. A boy who hated to write became a boy who loved to write. A boy who hated school became a boy who loved school. A boy who had been a mediocre student became a straight A student. And Andrea Lynch believed that this happened because she sent to him the message, I want to hear the story that you want to tell. You accomplish nothing when you say to your students, you're not allowed to write any stories, or anybody does. No violence allowed. You do not create boys who want to write stories about how they would feel if they weren't invited to the party. You create boys who say, school's stupid, I'm going to go home and play Fortnite. I can kill as many people as I want to. You create boys who think that school is for girls. Same school, same peer group, same content, same teachers. But this boy became an enthusiastic writer. And I've stayed in touch with Andrea Lynch, and she has stayed in touch with this boy. And that's our final slide. I just want to move to the last slide. I've stayed in touch with Andrea Lynch. She stayed in touch with this boy. This was years ago when he was in 6th grade. He's now in high school. More recently, the boy's parents said to him, okay, for summer camp, we can afford to send you to any one of these 1 week sleepaway camp summer camps. And they were pretty sure he would choose the backdoor camping and fishing because he loves outdoor camping and fishing. But to the parents' amazement, he chose the creative writing class, where every day you wake up, you write a story, you share it with your peers, you read their stories, a professor from the community college comes in to help you to be a better writer. And this is a boy who loves American football and Fortnite. If you understand gender differences, you can break down gender stereotypes. And the same boy who loves football and Fortnite will love to write. I've seen it myself. Gender-specific instructional strategies for the content areas, for the teacher-student relationship, for motivation. And you'll find more on these topics in my books, Why Gender Matters, especially Chapter 5. Boys Adrift, Chapters 2 and 8. Girls on the Edge, Chapter 5. Perhaps Parenting as a chapter exploring why American kids are now doing much worse than kids in other countries in education. All these books are available as audiobooks. They're available in 7 languages. The handout is my name, leonardsax.com/MCC2.pdf. It is case sensitive. It is all lowercase. My email address is shown there as well. And we must adjourn and head back. I hope, if you weren't planning on it, that you'll consider attending the second half of my talk to parents, including talking about the dangers of social media and the hazards of American culture and what parents need to know to improve the outcomes for their son, their daughter. So there's no overlap between that presentation and this one. But we must adjourn because I'm supposed to start over there in 8 minutes. So thank you very much.